Hi, boys and girls. I'm going to try to do this outside on the back porch with the dog, Buddy, and I may have to compete with the bird, so we'll see if this works out. It is Tuesday, April the 21st, so I want to give a shout out to Kyler Seymour and to Donald Smith. You guys are a lot of fun, and I miss your good senses of humor and just the joy you bring. Well, I want to talk to you about the writing just a little bit. I know the writing this week was to write about someone you really miss and that you would like to spend time with. And Jerry has already sent me his through pictures, so that was really fast, Jerry. Here is one that I wrote, and I wanted to show you that this would definitely be a rough draft because you can see I've got things marked through and everything. But let me just read mine to you and talk to you just a little bit about it. My first sentence says, one person I would like to spend time with is my daughter Erin. Now at first I wrote, she is living in France for a couple of years, but I felt like that was just a little confusing, so I changed it to, she moved to France in January and will be there for a couple of years. So then my next sentence says, I would enjoy walking in her new town with her, especially now when the flowers are so pretty. We enjoy talking, watching shows on Netflix, and playing dominoes and card games. Her birthday is this Friday, and I would love to be with her to help celebrate. Erin is one person that I would love to spend time with. Okay, did you notice the concluding sentence is very much like the first sentence, your topic sentence? So that kind of wraps it up. Remember, a good paragraph is like a sandwich. It's got the piece of bread here, the piece of bread here, the main idea, and everything in the middle are the good details. Just like in a sandwich, you might put meat, cheese, tomato, lettuce, etc. Pickles for some of you. I know you love pickles. One thing you don't have to say, one reason is, another reason is, the third reason is. Just act like you're talking to someone and use your natural voice. Listen one more time. This is something I could just say to someone. One person I'd like to spend time with right now is my daughter Erin. She moved to France in January and she'll be there for a couple of years. I would enjoy walking in her new town with her, especially now when the flowers are so pretty. We enjoy talking, watching shows on Netflix together, and playing dominoes and card games. Her birthday's this Friday, and I'd love to be with her to help celebrate. Erin is one person I would love to spend time with. It may not sound exactly like when you're talking, but you're trying to make it as natural as possible. And you're not just saying, I would like to spend time with them. You're telling how you would like to spend time with them. We've got an airplane flying overhead. And giving as many details as you can. I gave mainly 3 that I would enjoy walking with her and exploring her new town. Then just some little things we like to do, talking, watching Netflix shows, and playing games. And then also I mentioned her birthday. So that was the 3 main things that were mentioned, and I just added little details around those. Hope that helps. Guys, we're going to get to read Indians in the House. So I want you to, ouch, the dog is wanting attention, I guess. I want you to listen for these 5 questions. Number 1, why wasn't Paul there when the Indians came? Number 2, what direction did Paul give the girls? He told them one thing they needed to do or not do. Number 3, which one of the girls, Mary or Laura, wanted to let Jack go so badly when the Indians came? Number 4, what made the strong smell when the Indians were in the house? No, no, baby. And number 5, what did the Indians eat and what did they take? So there are 2 answers to the 5th question. Okay, let's listen for the story. Indians in the House. Here is the first picture. Stop. Okay. Here we go. Early one morning, Paul took his gun and went hunting. He had meant to make the bedstead that day. He had brought in the slabs when Ma said she had no meat for dinner, so he stood the slabs against the wall and took down his gun. Jack wanted to go hunting too. His eyes begged Paul to take him, and whines came up from his chest and quivered in his throat till Laura almost cried with him. But Paul chained him to the stable. Maybe Buddy will like this story since Jack plays an important part in it. "No, Jack," Paul said, "you must stay here and guard the place." Then he said to Mary and Laura, "Don't let him loose, girls." Poor Jack lay down. It was a disgrace to be chained, and he felt it deeply. He turned his head from Paul and would not watch him going away with the gun on his shoulder. Paul went farther and farther away till the prairie swallowed him and he was gone. Laura tried to comfort Jack, but he would not be comforted. The more he thought about the chain, the worse he felt. Laura tried to cheer him up to frisk and play, but he only grew more sullen. Both Mary and Laura felt that they could not leave Jack while he was unhappy, so all that morning they stayed by the stable. They stroked Jack's smooth, brindled head and scratched around his ears and told him how sorry they were that he must be chained. He lapped their hands a little bit, but he was very sad and angry. His head was on Laura's knee, and she was talking to him when suddenly he stood up and growled a fierce, deep growl. The hair on his neck stood straight up, and his eyes glared red. Laura was frightened. Jack had never growled at her before. Then she looked over her shoulder where Jack was looking, and she saw two naked wild men coming, one behind the other on the Indian trail. They're not really naked, but she does use that word. "Mary, look!" she cried. Mary looked and saw them too. They were tall, thin, fierce-looking men. Their skin was brownish red. Their heads seemed to go up to a peak, and the peak was a tuft of hair that stood straight up and ended in feathers. Their eyes were black and still and glittering like snakes' eyes. They came closer and closer. Then they went out of sight on the other side of the house. Laura's head turned, and so did Mary's, and they looked at the place where those terrible men would appear when they came past the house. "Indians," Mary whispered. Laura was shivering. There was a queer feeling in her middle, and the bones in her legs felt weak. She wanted to sit down, but she stood and looked and waited for those Indians to come out from beyond the house. The Indians did not do that. All this time, Jack had been growling. No. Now he stopped growling and was lunging against the chain. His eyes were red and his lips curled back, and all the hair on his back was bristling. He bounded and bounded, clear off the ground, trying to get loose from the chain. There's Buddy. Laura was glad that the chain kept him right there with her. "Jack's here," she whispered to Mary. "Jack won't let them hurt us. We'll be safe if we stay close to Jack." "They are in the house," Mary whispered. "They are in the house with Ma and Carrie." Then Laura began to shake all over. She knew she must do something. She did not know what those Indians were doing to Ma and baby Carrie. There was no sound at all from the house. "Oh, what are they doing to Ma?" she screamed in a whisper. "Oh, I don't know," Mary whispered. "I'm going to let Jack loose," Laura whispered hoarsely. "Jack will kill them." "Paul said not to," Mary answered. They were too scared to speak out loud. They put their heads together and watched the house and whispered. "He didn't know Indians would come," Laura said. "He said not to let Jack loose." Mary was almost crying. Laura thought of little baby Carrie and Ma shut in the house with those Indians. She said, "I'm going to help Ma." She ran 2 steps and walked a step. Then she turned and flew back to Jack. She clutched him wildly and hung on to his strong, panting neck. Jack wouldn't let anything hurt her. "We mustn't leave Ma in there alone," Mary whispered. She stood still and trembled. Mary never could move when she was frightened. Laura hid her face against Jack. Stop. Laura hid her face against Jack and held on to him tightly. Then she made her arms let go. Her hands balled into fists and her eyes shut tight, and she ran toward the house as fast as she could run. She stumbled and fell down, and her eyes popped open. She was up again and running before she could think. Mary was close behind her. They came to the door. It was open, and they slipped into the house without a sound. The naked wild men stood by the fireplace. Ma was bending over the fire, cooking something. Carrie clung to Ma's skirts with both hands, and her head was hidden in the folds. Laura ran toward Ma, but just as she reached the hearth, she smelled a horribly bad smell, and she looked up at the Indians. Quick as a flash, she ducked behind the long, narrow slab that leaned against the wall. The slab was just wide enough to cover both her eyes. If she held her head perfectly still and pressed her nose against the slab, she couldn't see the Indians, and she felt safer, but she couldn't help moving her head just a little so that one eye peeped out and she could see the wild men. Here is a picture, first of all, of Laura peeking out from behind the slab, and of course the Indians could see her. And here is the picture of the Indians in the house. You can see how they're dressed. You can see baby Carrie looks like a doll staring at them, and Ma is cooking something over the fire. Hey. First she saw their leather moccasins, then their stringy, bare, red-brown legs all the way up. Around their waists, each of the Indians wore a leather thong, and the furry skin of a small animal hung down in front. The fur was striped black and white, and now Laura knew what made that smell. The skins were fresh skunk skins. A knife like Pa's hunting knife and a hatchet like Pa's hatchet were stuck into each skunk skin. The Indians' ribs made little ridges up their bare sides. Their arms were folded on their chests. At last Laura looked again at their faces, and she dodged quickly behind the slabs. Their faces were bold and fierce and terrible. Their black eyes glittered. High on their foreheads and above their ears where hair grows, these wild men had no hair. But on top of their heads a tuft of hair stood straight up. It was wound around with string, and feathers were stuck in it. When Laura peeked out from behind the slab again, both Indians were looking straight at her. Her heart jumped into her throat and choked her with its pounding. Two black eyes glittered down into her eyes. The Indian did not move. Not one muscle of his face moved. Only his eyes shone and sparkled at her. Laura didn't move either. She didn't even breathe. The Indian made two short, harsh sounds in his throat. The other Indian made one sound like, "Ha!" Laura hid her eyes behind the slab again. She heard Ma take the cover off the bake oven. She heard the Indians squat down on the hearth. After a while, she heard them eating. Laura peeked and hid and peeked again while the Indians ate the cornbread that Ma had baked. They ate every morsel of it and even picked up the crumbs from the hearth. Ma stood and watched them and stroked baby Carrie's head. Mary stood close behind Ma and held on to her sleeve. Faintly, Laura heard Jack's chain rattling. Jack was still trying to get loose. When every crumb of the cornbread was gone, the Indians rose up. The skunk smell was stronger than when they moved. One of them made harsh sounds in his throat again. Ma looked at him with big eyes. She did not say anything. The Indian turned around, the other Indian turned too, and they walked across the floor and out through the door. Their feet made no sound at all. Ma sighed a long, long sigh. She hugged Laura tight in one arm and Mary tight in the other arm, and through the window they watched those Indians going away, one behind the other on the dim trail toward the west. Then Ma sat down on the bed and hugged Laura and Mary tighter and trembled. She looked sick. So there's a picture of the Indians going away. Oops, sorry. Hey, buddy. Do you feel sick, Ma? Mary asked her. No, said Ma. I'm just thankful they're gone. Laura wrinkled her nose and said, "They smell awful." That was the skunk skins they wore, Ma said. Then they told her how they had left Jack and had come into the house because they were afraid the Indians would hurt her and baby Carrie. Ma said that they were her brave little girls. "Now we must get dinner," she said. "Pa will be here soon and we must have dinner ready for him." Ma said they were her, "Mary, bring me some wood. Laura, you may set the table." Ma rolled up her sleeves and washed her hands and mixed cornbread, while Mary brought the wood and Laura set the table. She set a tin plate and knife and fork and cup for Pa, and the same for Ma, with Carrie's little tin cup beside Ma's. And she set tin plates and knives and forks for her and Mary, but only their one cup between the plates. Ma made the cornmeal and water into 2 thin loaves, each shaped in a half circle. She laid the loaves with their straight sides together in the bake oven, and she pressed her hand flat on top of each loaf. Hello. Pa always said he did not ask any other sweetening when Ma put the prints of her hands on the loaves. Laura had hardly set the table when Pa was there. He left a big rabbit and 2 prairie hens outside the door and stepped in and laid his gun on its pegs. Laura and Mary ran and clutched him, both talking at once. "What's all this? What's all this?" he said, rumpling their hair. "Indians? So you've seen Indians at last, have you, Laura? I notice they have a camp in a little valley west of here. Did Indians come to the house, Caroline?" "Yes, Charles, 2 of them," Ma said. "I'm sorry, but they took all of your tobacco, and they ate a lot of cornbread. They pointed to the cornmeal and made signs for me to cook some. I was afraid not to. Oh, Charles, I was afraid." "You did the right thing," Pa told her. "We don't want to make enemies of any Indians." Then he said, "Woo, what a smell." "They wore fresh skunk skin," said Ma. And that was all they wore. "Must have been thick while they were here," Pa said. "It was, Charles. We were short of cornmeal, too." "Oh, well, we have enough to hold out a while yet, and our meat is running all over the country. Don't worry, Caroline." "But they took all your tobacco." "Never mind," Pa said. "I'll get along without tobacco till I can make that trip to Independence. The main thing is to be on good terms with the Indians. We don't want to wake up some night with a band of the screeching dev—" He stopped. Laura dreadfully wanted to know what he'd been going to say. But Ma's lips were pressed together, and she shook a little shake of her head at Pa. "Come on, Mary and Laura," Pa said. "We'll skin that rabbit and dress the prairie hens while that cornbread bakes. Hurry, I'm hungry as a wolf." They sat on the woodpile in the wind and sunshine and watched Pa work with his hunting knife. The big rabbit was shot through the eye, and the prairie hens' heads were shot clean away. They never knew what hit them, Pa said. Laura held the edge of the rabbit skin while Pa's keen knife ripped it off the rabbit meat. "I'll salt this skin and peg it out on the house wall to dry," he said. "It will make a warm fur cap for some little girl to wear next winter." But Laura could not forget the Indians. She said to Pa that if they had turned Jack loose, he would have eaten those Indians right up. Pa laid down the knife. "Did you girls even think of turning Jack loose?" he asked in a dreadful voice. Laura's head bowed down and she whispered, "Yes, Pa." "After I told you not to?" Pa said in a more dreadful voice. Laura couldn't speak, but Mary choked, "Yes, Pa." For a moment, Pa was silent. He sighed a long sigh, like Ma's sigh after the Indians went away. "After this," he said in a terrible voice, "you girls remember to do as you're told. Don't even think of disobeying me. Do you hear?" "Yes, Pa," Laura and Mary whispered. "Do you know what would have happened if you had turned Jack loose?" Pa asked. "No, Pa," they whispered. "He would have bitten those Indians," said Pa. "Then there would have been trouble, bad trouble. Do you understand?" "Yes, Pa," they said, but they did not understand. "Would they have killed Jack?" Laura asked. "Yes, and that's not all. You girls remember this. You do as you're told no matter what happens." Yes, Pa, Laura said. And Mary said, yes, Pa. They were glad they had not turned Jack loose. Do as you're told, said Pa, and no harm will come to you. Okay, make sure you got your piece of paper ready. Hopefully, Buddy will calm down. He's only about a year old, so he's still in the puppy stage. He loves to chew, but he doesn't realize how much it can hurt. Okay, here is your first question. Why wasn't Paul there when the Indians came? I'm going to give you about 5 seconds, but if you need more time, just pause this. Okay, the answer is he went hunting. They were out of meat, so he went hunting. Number 2, what direction did Paul give the girls? What did he tell them not to do? The answer is he told them not to let Jack off of the chain. Number 3, which one of the girls was it that wanted to let Jack go so badly? The answer is Laura. I was really impressed with Mary because she could have told on Laura and said it was mainly her, it wasn't me, but she accepted the guilt just like, or she accepted the blame just like Laura. Number 4, what made the strong smell when the Indians were in the house? Okay, it was the skunk skins the Indians wore. And number 5, 2 parts to this question. What did they eat and what did they take? Okay, the answer, they ate cornbread and they took Paul's tobacco. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Let me see if Buddy will say bye. Ugh, come here. Now he doesn't want to be, okay. Now when I want him to, he doesn't want to be here. Say bye. Okay. Bye, guys.